started. I wanted to welcome everyone. My name is Jonathan Bricker, and I'm the chairman of the Arkansas District Export Council. And I just want to say thank you for joining our webinar today. For those of you who aren't quite sure who the DEC is and what we do, we are a private nonprofit organization that brings together experienced international business people with potential exporters. Each DEC member has been appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce because of their real-world expertise in international trade. Now, having said that, we don't know all the answers, but we can introduce you to someone that does. You can view us more as a community of connections within the exporting world. My hope today is that you walk away from this webinar with a little bit more confidence in your exporting abilities. And if you have any questions at the end of the webinar and you don't feel comfortable asking them here, I do invite you to reach out to us on our website at exportarkansas.org, and we'll reach back out to you with some answers. We'll also have the presenter share the slides with you if so requested. We definitely want to be your strategic partner to help you grow your exports, which in turn will help grow your bottom line. I'd like to introduce everyone today to your moderator, Rudy Ortiz. Rudy is recently retired from the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, and he's also the previous chairman of the DEC. Today, he is the owner of Strategic Business Services, where he assists companies in a wide variety of international business and exporting needs. He is a certified global business professional, as well as a U.S. Department of Commerce certified export trade counselor. And for these reasons, he is the DEC's education chair. Rudy, thanks for spearheading this today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Heidi, could I ask you to go ahead and go back to the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions slide? Thank you so much. I want to thank the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions Department, which is within AEDC, for being the sponsors of our webinar series. Their mission is to maximize enterprise value for manufacturers through innovation, operational excellence, sustainability, and leadership development. And once again, they are one of the main reasons that we do these webinars and have the ability to do so. So thank you very much, AEDC and Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions. With that, we will go to Mr. William Burgess. William Burgess is the co-CEO of a laser company in the Little Rock area called Power Technology. And he has a lot of experience with exporting. I think that he exports to over 40 countries. So he's extremely well versed in international trade. And he does trade with Canada, which is why we've asked him on today's webinar to give some insights, some personal insights on doing business in Canada and what his experience has been. So with that, William, if you will please make your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. Yeah, as Rudy mentioned, Power Technologies in the laser business, and we've been exporting now for almost 50 years. So it's been a nice long run. We've kind of developed a little bit of expertise over the years. Rudy's right. Over the last 5 years, we've exported to 40 countries, and over the last year, we've exported to 30 countries. So we see a variety of different regulations from different nationalities. And I'm here to tell you, Canada is by far the easiest country to export to. It just doesn't get any easier. So if you're new to exporting, Canada is the place to start. It's great because it's a common language. The law is similar. You don't have to worry about a different legal structure. And, you know, if you do have to enforce some sort of agreement, it's going to be a lot easier in Canada than it is, say, in Malaysia or Singapore, something like that. It's going to be a lot more affordable. So let's see, you know, NAFTA was signed a decade or two ago, which is part of why it's so easy to export to Canada, all of the necessary paperwork is built into the software that's used by UPS, FedEx, and DHL. You know, you'll have to issue a certificate of origin, but now with these newer software packages, it's the click of a checkbox in the software as you're shipping a package. You don't have to print out a form and provide it in triplicate or anything like that. Simply just check a box when you're shipping to Canada, and automatically the paperwork is created for you. So it's, again, really easy compared to countries like Brazil, where you know tons of paperwork are required. So last thing is, you know, some exports to other countries require something called AES clearance to clear them through US Customs if they're over a certain value or it's a certain commodity. You know, unless you're shipping diamonds or weapons to Canada, you don't have to worry about AES and doing the export when you're exporting to Canada. So again, it is really easy to export to Canada. And as I said, we've exported there for decades. So hopefully today, you know, Nathan's going to give you the information that you need to kind of get over the hump and start exporting. I'm here to say that it's easy and it can be done. So it just takes a little bit of effort, find the first customer, and to get started in exporting. With that, I'll turn it back to Rudy.
William, thank you so much. And William, you're obviously exactly correct. Canada should definitely be at least one of the first countries that you attempt to export to, because it gets you in the door in a easy fashion. The learning curve is small, and a lot of things are positive for doing business in Canada. And with that, I will introduce today's main speaker, Nathan Donahue. Nathan is a trade professional with the U.S. Commercial Service and has been doing that for almost 8 years, and he's currently based in Toronto, Canada. Nathan has experience in frontier, emerging, and high growth markets, and excels at assisting businesses to expand internationally. He helps companies adapt to new markets and understands the intricacies of economic, government, and societal factors that are relevant to developing trade competitiveness, and works with businesses across a broad spectrum of industries to identify opportunities and barriers, and to cultivate relationships and networks, and formulate and implement country and regional strategies. And with that, we will turn it over to Nathan.
All right, let me just share my screen. All right, so glad I could be on here today. Again, I'm Nathan Donahue. I'm the Deputy Principal Commercial Officer here in our consulate in Toronto. I'm also currently covering all of our Western Canada offices. So pretty much anything west of Ontario, I'm helping support. Prior to this position, I was actually in Shanghai for 3 years doing a very similar job. So again, happy to be on here today. I'm going to give a quick overview of Canada, the Canadian market. I'll talk about our bilateral relationship, priorities, and then I can talk a little bit about what the commercial service does as a whole and how we can help. So Canada first. It's the second largest country in the world by landmass. There are 6 time zones, 10 provinces, 3 territories. And at the same time, although it's really large, the population is actually only about the 10th the size of the US. They've got about 38 million people. So it's a much bigger territory with a fraction of the population. The border with the US is the longest land border in the world, which is really great for us because for Canadians, it's easy for them to access the US to do business and to travel for shopping. 90% of the Canadian population actually lives within 125 miles of the border. Essentially, there's 3 main land or population hubs and economic centers. So you have the Ontario region, you have the Quebec region, and you have the West Coast and the prairies. Turning to Canada's economy, it's the 11th largest economy in the world. It's affluent, high-tech industrial society, and as William was saying, very easy to do business with. So next slide. So if we look at the Canadian government, in terms of the government, Ottawa is the capital of the federal government. Toronto's considered to be the economic capital of Canada, much like Shanghai is for China. The current Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau. He's the leader of the Liberal Party. Canada functions under a constitutional and parliamentary democracy. So the King of England is the official head of state. They have 105 seats in their Senate, and then they have their House of Commons with 338 seats. So similar aspects to government that we can kind of relate to. I'd say one thing that's really different, though, is their election season. So their election season is rough. It's a minimum 36 days and a maximum of 50 days. So, we just got done with our most recent election here in the US. And as you can see, that was something we talked about a long time. Campaigning takes a long time. In Canada, it's short, it's sweet, and it's done. Also, English and French are the two official languages, which is really important for doing business in Canada, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And it relates to Quebec. So Quebec was originally explored and founded by the French. It was a colony of New France, and it wasn't until the French and Indian Wars that the British defeated the French and took control. It's significant because following that war, they did what's called the British Quebec Act, which recognized French law in that region, as well as French as the official language. So because of that, they've got this long history of being different. And Quebec remains fiercely independent, and that language piece is a key distinction. It's actually home to 85% of the Canadians whose dominant language is French. And they actually have a charter of the French language, which is the cornerstone of all their language policy. So this was adopted in 1977, covers almost all areas of government and law, and essentially requires that French be the prominent language on everything. And so that's very significant to remember. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it definitely impacts how we do business in Canada. So looking at the bilateral relationship, the United States and Canada enjoy the world's largest and most comprehensive trade relationship. It supports millions of jobs in each country and constitutes about 1.7 billion in trade and investment. It's traditionally the top US export market. It counts for about 17% of all goods and exports in 2021. Canadians and Canadian businesses purchase more goods and services from the US really than any other country in the world. Canadians spend more than about 60% of their disposable income on US goods and services. And between the two of us, we trade about $2 billion in goods and services every day. As it stands, 31 US states rank Canada as their #1 export market. In 2021, US exports to Canada exceeded total US exports to China, Japan, and India combined. Investment also plays a really significant role in the relationship. In 2021, Canadian foreign direct investment in the US was over $600 billion, making Canada the United States' third largest source of FDI. Canadian investments are important because they support over 680,000 US jobs, and they've invested over $1 billion in innovative research and development. And it goes both ways. The United States is also Canada's top source of foreign direct investment, with investment stock in the United States totaling about more than $400 billion. So one of the key things for us in the bilateral relationship now is this roadmap for a renewed US-Canada partnership. It really is the cornerstone. This was announced by President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau last year. It's the blueprint for our bilateral engagement, addressing a key number of priorities. First of which, really combating COVID. This was a huge concern for both of our countries, globally, but in the way that we interact with each other. And from the very beginning, I think both governments were committed to working together to figure out the best way to maximize cooperation and quickly move towards pandemic recovery, which then lends into this idea of building back better together. The roadmap outlines a shared vision for a sustainable and inclusive economic recovery, and joint initiatives to really try to accelerate the recovery of small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as focusing on diversity and inclusion and supporting women and minority-owned businesses. Climate change is, of course, a key priority as well for the administration, and it's something we've prioritized in the roadmap. Addressing climate change, the way we see it in commerce, is a great opportunity for US businesses. US firms can offer solutions for reducing Canada's carbon footprint, from new civil nuclear technologies to energy-saving commercial and residential solutions. The Arctic is also a key piece of the relationship right now. As part of the roadmap, both countries agreed to launch an expanded US-Canada Arctic dialogue to talk about cross-cutting issues on continental security, economic, social development, Arctic governance. The roadmap recognizes the opportunity for clean growth in the Arctic. It's a place where clean technology and sustainable development can help achieve our climate goals. As we see it, the United States is a world leader in research, development, innovation, and clean tech space. And at the Department of Commerce, we're really trying to support these goals by assisting U.S. companies to help build stronger relationships in these areas. Another one, which I'm sure you all have heard about at some point, would be critical minerals. With the roadmap, both the countries agreed to strengthen the Canada-U.S. Critical Minerals Action Plan to secure the critical minerals sector and all the metals that are vitally important to the transition to new technology and clean energy, and really just trying to focus on our long-term economic security. This is a whole of government priority for the United States. Critical minerals are required for the manufacturing of advanced technology in sectors from aerospace to defense to medicine, electronics, new age vehicles. For its part, Canada produces about 60 minerals, including critical minerals like aluminum, cobalt, copper, graphite, uranium. And as it stands, lithium and vanadium are emerging minerals with current exploration underway in Canada. And this connects with the Arctic as well, because it's home to a lot of these critical minerals that we're focused on. The only issue for us right now is that as it stands, Canada, as well as the US and our mining sector, we're really starting to develop the mines to produce these critical minerals because we haven't traditionally done so. But part of the reason this is significant is because we're really focusing on this idea of, as we call it, trusted partners. So Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland here in Canada met with our Treasury Secretary Yellen earlier this year, and they really highlighted this idea of trusted partners, specifically because of the areas that we just talked about. So again, we look at the Arctic, critical minerals in the Arctic, we're increasingly needing to rely on trusted partners because as climate change occurs, the Arctic's becoming more accessible to countries such as Russia and even China that are poised to make stronger territorial claims. And so we need to make sure that we're increasing our efforts in these areas to secure our access to these energy reserves. And as we talk about critical minerals, China dominates the market in trade for critical minerals, which is an increasing liability when we look at our future technology needs. Canada really differentiates itself from other countries supplying critical minerals, not only because it's a predictable investment climate, but also because it's committed to clean energy conservation, sustainable economic development, and the well-being of their local communities. Telecommunications, again, is another space. Canada is also standing firm with the United States on permitting access to the growing 5G infrastructure from Chinese companies such as Huawei and ZTE. China has notorious domestic legislation that has outlined clear control for the Chinese government over Chinese technology companies operating domestically or internationally. Essentially, it's a backdoor access to all their user data, which isn't something that we're comfortable with or should be for our companies and for our citizens. And then really, supply chain disruptions due to COVID, as well as the recent war in Ukraine, have only continued to strengthen this idea that we need to be able to rely on trusted partners because we can't have outside factors impacting our supply chains and our ability to deliver. So if we want to look at, a couple industries I know that are significant to Arkansas, aerospace is a key industry in Canada, which is the world's 5th largest aerospace market, and it's the world's 3rd largest civil aircraft manufacturer. It's valued at about $24 billion. It's largely a civil aviation market, which is different from the U.S. aerospace market, which has equities both in the military and civil sectors. For Canadian aerospace, small and medium enterprises, geographic proximity plays a large role. Consequently, U.S. suppliers are sought after because we're closer. And you shouldn't assume that you've maximized your business with the U.S. company because you're currently supplying them in the U.S. If that company is also in Canada, you really want to make sure that you're connecting with their Canadian distributors and their Canadian heads over there to make sure that with those subsidiaries, you might have selling opportunities well. In terms of the aerospace clusters in Canada, Quebec represents the largest with about 55 to 60% of Canada's aerospace production. It's also home to Bombardier. Ontario is the 2nd largest cluster, representing 20 to 25% of Canada's production. And so as you can see from the chart on the slide, most notable aerospace companies are represented in Canada, including US and European companies. There's a key show in April if you're interested. The show is called Aeromart. It's in Montreal. The event will feature participants from across the globe with an opportunity for B2B meetings with key decision makers, as well as a really robust conference schedule. Our office will be there. Our Montreal office will be staffing it to provide support to U.S. exporters seeking opportunities in the market. Agriculture, also extremely critical in terms of the trade relationship. Canada ranks second in terms of U.S. exports, and the market was valued at almost $30 billion in 2021, with forest products and baked goods actually leading as the top export categories. Now, all that being said, as much as we've said doing business in Canada is a good idea, it doesn't mean that there aren't barriers. As with many of our partners, Canada has a number of policies which create barriers for US companies to really openly access and freely compete in Canada. And it's good to be aware of. So, a couple examples. The Canadian content requirements. This one's really interesting. And so essentially it is there to help promote domestic content production for Canadian television and radio. Essentially, if you're listening to the radio, roughly 40% has to be Canadian content, and 55% of television must be Canadian content. So what this means is, if you turn on the radio and you listen for a while, it's going to be different than what you're used to listening to in the US, because we don't have content requirements. We really just play whatever's popular. But here in Canada, you're just going to start hearing generally a lot more Canadian musicians than you would be used to hearing. I've heard more Justin Bieber and Ryan Adams than I would have expected. And definitely now that it's Christmas, Michael Bublé. There's a lot more Canadian Christmas songs that I was unaware of until I started listening to the Canadian radio. But when we talk about telecommunications, it's not just content where there's restrictions. Canada maintains a 46.7% limit on foreign ownership of certain existing suppliers of telecommunication services, including the cable television industry, which is interesting because for someone like me who comes from China, that's one of the things that we always found very difficult about dealing with the Chinese government is these foreign ownership limitations and the requirement to really find a joint venture agreement to be able to operate in certain industries. Data localization is also important to pay attention to legislation taking place. The province of Quebec adopted a law in September of last year that amended its data protection regime. And so under the new law, the transfer of personal data outside of Quebec is limited. So implementation of this law is really being phased over the next few years. But the important thing to realize is that data privacy and restrictions are a growing concern in Canada. And these type of limitations are likely to continue to grow. And it was a key concern like this that actually ended up scrapping a very large smart city development that was going to be taking place here in Toronto because the citizens were just worried about a locality having that much data on them. Digital service tax as well is something else that Canada's been exploring. It's been talked about for a number of years. Where they are trying to implement a tax that really is only going to apply to outside firms. So again, we have a lot of digital US companies that are operating here in Canada, and they would be taxed, whereas local companies wouldn't be, which we see as unfair. It's for issues like these, and these idea of trade barriers, that we engaged in the USMCA negotiations to really try to update our relationship. Particularly based on our previous NAFTA. And the idea is that the USMCA is there to improve market access, particularly for manufacturers, for agricultural exports, reduce incentives to outsource, increase environmental protections, and hopefully, help revise investment provisions. There's a number of notable changes. I'll just talk about a couple. One of which is copyright terms. Copyright's really interesting facet of the law. And so prior to USMCA, in Canada, the copyright protections were only 50 years, which is starkly different than the way they're protected in the US, which extends copyrights for 95 years. Because of USMCA, we were able to get Canadians to agree to a longer copyright term, so 70 years of publication or 75 years after the life of the author, which is really great. But it's really interesting when you start thinking about the limitations of copyright and recognizing that if you look at something, say, like Disney and original Disney content, a lot of original Disney content was taking place in the 30s. So technically under copyright restrictions in Canada, they don't have the same protections that they do in the US because they would have expired. The USMCA also acknowledged the new digital environment and required application of new enforcement measures, which is significant because, under NAFTA, we really didn't have the internet the way that we were using it. As most of you would have remembered, it would have been DOS computers, right? And really limited connections, whereas the industry that we're using for e-commerce is just light years different than when NAFTA went into enforcement. And so there weren't protections the way that we would need them. Under agriculture, we eliminated policies that unfairly low-priced Canadian dairy products to undersell US products in Canada and third country markets. We helped eliminate discriminatory grading of US wheat. We committed to ensuring that British Columbia eliminates discriminatory treatment of US origin wine in grocery stores. The alcohol market in Canada is still very protectionist, which is why, like, if you come, you're actually not likely to find a lot of US alcohol here or a lot of US beers. It's just very hard for them to enter the market. I was out at a restaurant not too long ago, and I was very surprised because they were actually selling a US craft beer in their menu. And what I come to realize was that they were actually manufacturing that beer here in Ontario. And what had happened was the US company, acknowledging the restriction to be able to really significantly import quantities to sell, did a licensing agreement. It was a really smart workaround so that they can actually still sell their beer here pretty equally alongside other Canadian beers. But that's the route that they had to take because they can't really import their craft beer in a way that's successful. And in finance, the USMCA committed to liberalizing some more financial services to make it a more level playing field. At the same time, cross-border banking isn't seamless, and most major US banks can't really operate here in the normal consumer market. It's mostly B2B, which again is a bit of a barrier. So then, if we're talking about the best ways to do business in Canada, and we can talk about tips. So Canada again has many similarities to the US, but it's not the US, and there are important differences to keep in mind as you're considering how to enter the market and where to enter the market. First, again, geography, climate, it's a large territory, bigger than the US. That means marketing and logistics can be difficult. Climate has an impact. I've worked with a company before that had to adjust the type of motor oil that they used in their portable electric generators because they were not calibrated for the colder climate and the generator wouldn't function. So they had to get a different quality oil to put inside of it to be able to successfully operate in the market. Also, exchange rate plays an important role. It's relatively stable, but it can fluctuate. And it's done so over the past, definitely done so in the past couple of years, which is significant when you're considering product prices and how you're setting your market. And then as we look to market at the local market, again, you need to be aware of where you're targeting. Every province is actually very different. They have different priorities, they have different legislations, different standards. So you have to make sure that for whatever market you're trying to sell into, that you've actually checked all the right boxes. And one of the big pieces of that, again, as we talked about Quebec. And so in Quebec, you have to make sure that you have French on your products. And you should consider having French translations to your website for really anywhere in Canada, because it is a dual language country. Certifications and licensing in general, products which need certification in the US must obtain a separate Canadian certification. So it's always good to check on that. Again, labeling requirements. Canada, because it's bilingual, has bilingual labeling and packaging requirements. So any goods shipped to Canada have to comply with these regulations. Most provinces and territories are predominantly English speaking, but they still have that requirement. And there's a small caveat for Quebec, which again, we talked about French needing to be predominant. That means it can't be 50-50. It actually needs to be more like 51% French content and 49% English content on that packaging. And again, it's very important to verify this before you're trying to enter the market. There are ways around the language requirements for packaging. If, say, for instance, you're selling direct to a consumer and that's not trying to resell it, or if you're doing e-commerce. But again, it's important to be aware. Intellectual property, it's always good to have a really good strategy. We just mentioned that there's differences in copyright law here. IP is protected differently in Canada than the US. Intellectual property rights must be registered and enforced under local Canada laws. It's vital that every company understand this, that intellectual property is a private right, and the US government can't enforce those rights for you. So you need to be prepared to do that yourself. And then actually one of the biggest ones for me, I feel like when talking to companies, is Canadian anti-spam legislation, or CASL for short. It's one of the most important considerations because it limits the way that you can send messages and emails. And US companies doing business in Canada have to comply. So the 3 basic requirements are that 1, you have to have the consent of the recipient before your business email is sent. 2, you have to have identifying information in all your messages. And then 3, all your commercial electronic messages must include an obvious unsubscribe mechanism. So you can't spam. And what this means is, we do a lot of services for companies, which I'll talk about here in a second. But for Canada, it's definitely different the way that we approach it than other markets, because we can't send out spam emails, right? We can't just be emailing left and right. We have to really dig in to try to help find the right person. A lot of times that means we do hundreds of cold calls to try to help people find the right partner. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So at the commercial service, we are the trade promotion arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we're really here to help companies looking to export internationally. We know that there are any number of questions when looking at a foreign market, and really our goal is to help you answer them. So our mandate from the U.S. government is to promote U.S. exports, advance and protect U.S. commercial interests, and then attract investment into the U.S. Really, in a nutshell, we're here to make exporting easier, because what's good for your business is good for the U.S. economy. And on average, the U.S. commercial service creates about half a new job for every company we help. So how does this work? At the commercial service, we utilize a network of trade and investment professionals located in over 70 countries and over 100 domestic locations in the U.S. And the professionals are there to provide face-to-face direct support, both at home and internationally. So our domestic specialists provide counseling and advice to connecting with the right market. And then they connect them to our international specialists who are in country really to work daily to understand the export landscape for interested U.S. companies. So part of what we do is, we do trade counseling. So essentially, before we do anything, we always make sure that we sit with the company and we talk about, their planning, their market entry strategies, potential legal and regulatory hurdles, whether they have licensing compliance, whether they've considered intellectual property. We also do market intelligence in each country that we're at. We offer initial market checks for companies to gauge market potential. We provide information on best prospects, financing, laws, cultural expectations. We actually develop a very large report every single year. It's called our Country Commercial Guide. We maintain this on our website. So very easy to find. If you want to Google it, Country Commercial Guide Canada, it'll pop right up. And it's very easy to navigate, but the idea is very much like we're talking about today, this idea of doing business in Canada. It goes over a lot of these things that I've talked about, different market dynamics, different cultural expectations, different requirements. It's about a 100-page document, so it can be extremely valuable as a good resource, again, when you're considering doing business. So please keep that in mind, make a note. You can find it anytime. And like I said, we update it usually in the summer every year. And then the thing that we do the most is the business matchmaking, like I mentioned a minute ago, and really trying to help companies connect with the right partner. So we do this through our services that we call our International Partner Search or our Gold Key service. It's a tailored matchmaking service to usually try to connect you with the best agent, distributor, or dealer. And like I said, here in Canada, a lot of times that means that we sit down, we talk to you, you tell us your targets, and we try to develop a target list to go after. Not necessarily the specific companies, because we do that research for you, but the general idea of the companies in that industry. And then we'll work with you over a few weeks to kind of refine that list. We do a lot, again, of cold calls, trying to make sure that we're not just putting you in touch with a company, but we're putting you in touch with the right person at that company. And then we verify their interest in actually having a meeting with you. So essentially, when we do these services, the beauty of it is, you come to us, we have that conversation, we commit to doing it. And then hopefully we're able to come back to you in a few weeks with a meeting. And it's a valuable meeting because it's somebody that actually wants to talk to you, that's expressed high interest, and hopefully will lead to an export success for you. We also try to participate in any number of trade events. We connect with companies there. We try to bring pre-screened buyers to local trade shows. So that way, again, we're showing up with a delegation of Canadians that are there specifically to buy. And hopefully, if we're doing our jobs right, we've been able to connect with you potentially ahead of time, schedule some time at the show, and just make it as seamless of a connection as possible to try to help you, again, reach that export success. We do the same thing too at international shows. So if there are trade shows that you're interested in participating in Canada, reach out, let us know. We try to attend most local trade shows that are of significant size. And again, if you're coming, we're happy to connect you with any of the Canadian participants that we're aware of that might be a potential partner for you or a good match for your business. So, for us, really, the way that we see it, again, I like to say that we're opportunity creators. I know that last year for the entire commercial service, it looks like we helped about 31,000 US exporters. And the majority of those were actually small and medium-sized businesses. So it's really great, right? We're happy to help larger companies, and we're here to do that. But a lot of times, they're already been here for a while. They have established connections. They don't need us as much as smaller companies that are new to the market or have just entered the market and are really facing any number of challenges. And again, we're here to be a resource for that. So for us, again, we're all across Canada. We have an office in Calgary. We have an office in Toronto. Our embassy is in Ottawa, but we have a team there as well. And then we have an office in Montreal. Each one of these has regional coverage responsibilities. And really, we're here to make sure that we make exporting easier for you because we know it can be difficult. So, we know there's any number of ways to enter the market, and we're really here to help in whatever way we can. So please feel free to contact myself or any one of our offices. Definitely contact your local domestic trade office in the US. They know who we are as well. And again, I look forward to talking with any of you in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I wanted to add a couple of comments. First of all, Canada is an extremely large country, and it's very diverse, certainly in terms of its geography and also it's a French contingency. And so it's really important to understand, just like the United States, it's not some sort of monolithic country where everybody's exactly the same and you can treat them exactly the same. You have to do your research because obviously the west coast of Canada is different than the east coast of Canada and the central for reasons of geography. And the fact that they tend to be, isolated due to geography, and also in terms of history, they're very different demographics. And so do make sure that you take these things into account and do your research. Number one. Number two, something that was we didn't discuss, but I think is incredibly and increasingly important is supply chain management. Going forward, trying to regionalize your supply chain is going to be extremely important. I think that COVID really highlighted for us some of the pitfalls of buying stuff from China and other faraway places. And a lot of companies didn't make it as a consequence of that and wound up laying off their employees and all of that. And so one of the things that I want to highlight for you is that Canada and Mexico are going to be or continue to be important partners to the United States in terms of your supply chain. One of the things that I've been urging people to consider is to regionalize their supply chain and to do both at the same time, reshoring, i.e. bringing some of the production back into the United States and buying directly from the United States, but also buying from our partners in Canada and Mexico to make sure that you have a sustainable supply chain that will allow you to continue to operate despite anything things that are going on, further out in the world. So once again, reshoring and nearshoring are really important, and Canada is an integral piece to that. At this point, we will see if we have questions. Miss Heidi, do we have questions?
So Rudy, I wanted to touch on something as well. A couple of points. Nathan, first off, thank you. That was awesome, very informative. A couple of things that you had mentioned. One is having your website translated into French. I think that is of the utmost importance. You have to make it easier for your clients to do business with you. So don't let something as simple as that stand in the way of catching an order in a foreign country. So thank you for highlighting that. Two, you had also spoken about the trade shows and whatnot. And if anyone out there is not familiar with the STEP grant through the Arkansas World Trade Center, that is to help small businesses fund their export initiatives. So you can get a grant to attend these trade shows that Nathan was talking about. So you use that money to get up there and find new clients, and then have Nathan show you around and introduce you to the people that are the decision makers.
Yeah. And Jonathan, to your point about the World Trade Center and the STEP grant, in many cases, and I think currently it is the case, that the STEP grant can also be used to internationalize your website.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you need to try to turn it into have it translated into French, or to regionalize it so that it looks like it's a French Canadian website and all of that, or other countries, the STEP grants can be used for that. And so if you would like to get in touch with the World Trade Center here in Arkansas, which is in Rogers, Arkansas, feel free to contact us, or you can go to their website directly. And once again, it's the Arkansas World Trade Center.
Yeah, and if anybody out there needs a introduction, I'm right down the road from the World Trade Center. I'm happy to do that. I work closely with them on a daily basis. So reach out to me, and I'm happy to make that introduction over to you. And then lastly, I just want to say, please don't let the fact that you have to listen to Justin Bieber stop you from pursuing trade in Canada. Just kind of push that to the side and keep on going.
You don't have to listen to Justin Bieber. You can turn that station off.
Yeah. Nathan, as it turns out, we have at least one question. It says, looking at the 31,000 exporters that have been helped enter the Canadian market, are there any products or industries that stand out as highly receptive?
Again, it really depends provincially, right? So as an example, here in Ontario is a huge manufacturing base. And so the two biggest industries here are aerospace, like we mentioned, but also automotive. And that just makes sense, right? Because Ontario stretches touching between Detroit and then all the way to New York. And so auto manufacturing is huge here. We actually, I just visited a plant last week. GM just opened up their new Bright Drop facility because they're making electric vehicle vans here in this market. And so it's one of those things that it's the complete automotive chain that has opportunities here, right? It's not just selling the car, it's selling the pieces, the machines that go into making that possible. So certainly those industries are huge. But again, really, it just depends which specific market you're looking at. The oil and gas and energy market are very big out in Western Canada. They're traditional sectors that have been big out there, but I think all across Canada in the energy sector, they're making tons of investments to try to find more opportunities to do cleaner energy and then also greener buildings. So I think construction technology that you can utilize to make more energy efficiency in buildings is huge. I've seen great opportunities with safety and security, cybersecurity, pretty much anything you name. Franchising is also very big here too. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that if you are considering it, let's have that conversation because all that conversation costs us time, and we're happy to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're exactly correct. If you're selling lasers like William is, or shoes or whatever it is, there may be ideal markets in Canada that Nathan can look at and try to ascertain what is the best market for your particular product or service. And having that discussion with Nathan and also with the Arkansas District Export Council can be very helpful to try to determine the specific markets that you're probably going to have the greatest success at. Alrighty, I don't think that we have any more questions. Is that correct, Heidi?
That is correct. I don't see any more open questions.
All righty. Well, I want to let you know that we are going to be sending out the slides for today's presentation, and this has been recorded as well. And so you will be able to access that recording in what particular website is that, Ms. Heidi? Is that our website or YouTube as well?
Yes, it'll be on the YouTube, our YouTube channel.
Yes.
And I'll send out that link.
Excellent.
I would like everyone, here's another question.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. It says, can you tell us about the First Nations procurement policy?
Well, the better question would be, so exactly what do you mean by that? Can you explain? Because there's a couple ways to, are you asking how the First Nations procure things? Are you asking about limitations by the Canadian government on requiring First Nations to participate in certain types of industries at a certain percentage?
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know that he'll have time to type it all in.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us what you know about that?
So the second one is the one I'm more familiar with,
Okay.
which is, in certain industries out, particularly like in Western Canada, they're prioritizing making sure that First Nations economic development is part of their overall economic agenda. So in the mining industry specifically, there are requirements to have generally certain quotas, like say 25% of the Indigenous community be able to participate in those mining projects. I've seen some companies, Cheetah Resources being one of them, that went above that and actually incorporated the local First Nations community into about 75% of the project, which was critically beneficial to them because when we talked about where Canadians are located and how they're all close to the border, there is huge swaths of territory to the north that the First Nations still have strong rights to. And they're still underdeveloped areas. And so that's part of the reason why Canada is prioritizing making sure that First Nations are part of the economic development, because they want to make sure that as Canada grows, they're not leaving parts of their society behind. They want to make sure that good jobs are going to these communities, that infrastructure development is benefiting these communities, and that we don't just have these kind of one-off, like say mining projects that come into an area and don't do more to benefit the community. Now for the former, we're doing a lot in commerce to try to connect with these Indigenous communities to make sure that as the US, we're figuring out whatever opportunities there are to do more with them. Because they are traditionally organizations that we haven't been able to work with as much. And so we think it's extremely important to develop those relationships. We did a number of webinars last year where we had them participate, talk about economic opportunities in their area, particularly in the Arctic. And then we recently just took a mission of mostly Arctic First Nations to Washington, D.C. To talk about their economic development needs, because anytime we can understand someone's needs, we can figure out how to make that an opportunity for a U.S. exporter.
Perfect. And Nathan, I think that you answered the question that the gentleman had, which was what is the Canada's objective in terms of implementing this initiative? And I think that you answered that completely. So thank you so much. I don't think at this point that we have any additional questions. And so I think I will go ahead and close this out. Ms. Heidi, if you would put out the contact slide so that audience knows who's who and how to get a hold of them, I would appreciate that.
Yes. I do see a couple of comments in the Q&A you might want to.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. It looks like that just came up. It says, as mentioned, it is important to be aware of the current exchange rates for pricing products either in US or Canadian dollars. Companies can improve competitiveness with offering terms to buyers and export credit insurance. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Randy. The next one is from Jonah. Yes, our organization hosted the CAN Arctic delegations in Washington. Joan, what organization is that? If you could type that in. I'm not seeing that at this point. Oh, there it is. The National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much for
we
that.
appreciate that. Yes, that was highly appreciated. We got really great feedback from that mission when we returned. So thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Very good. I think that's all we have at this point. And so I think you should be seeing the slide right now that has Nathan's both email and phone number as well as mine, and the website for Manufacturing Solutions, our partner and sponsor for these series of different export related and supply chain webinars. The website for the Export District Export Council, and Heidi, our administrative coordinator, her contact information if you need to get a hold of her as well. And
Yes.
so
Could you all please do the evaluation survey? I put the link in the chat.
Perfect.
Do that. Just right now while you're thinking about it before you get on to something else.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the link at this point, Heidi, but maybe it's just my my screen.
Okay,
But
I will redo it then.
okay, all righty. Yeah. In any case, it's really important that you guys, there it is, that you fill out the survey so that we can know whether we're giving you the sort of information that you're looking for, and if not, so that we can improve it. So if you would take just a minute to fill out the survey, it's a very, very quick survey, and it'll be very, very helpful to allow us to be of better service to you, the exporter. And with that, I think we will close it out. All righty. Thank you again, Nathan, Jonathan, Heidi, and William. Thank you so much for being part of today's webinar. And we look forward to having the next one